Right, to expand the conversation, we're joined by U.S. Correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease to get more details around this show. And a very good evening to you. We know as we look at the story, one wonders what's been some of the early analysis and the reaction to the speech.
Well, and Paul, this is usually and traditionally an occasion for the United States president to present their policy and legislative vision for the country and their vision for the future of the United States. It's also an occasion to really be a unifying force as an American president, not only to speak to your party's interests, but also to reach out across the aisle so as to broaden consensus around those policy initiatives that they put forward. And what we got, unfortunately, was very much a house divided, right? From the entrance of President Donald Trump into the chamber, you saw Democrats seated unresponsive. Normally they line the aisle to welcome the president in. You saw them holding up those placards denouncing the president as he was speaking. And of course you had Al Green stand up and try to interrupt the president when he didn't agree with the president's characterization of the mandate that he had received from the electorate. This is a president who referred to his predecessor Joe Biden as the worst president in American history, and that does little to unify the House, right? And Professor Jeremy Suri of the University of Texas, he's a professor of public affairs, of history at the University of Texas, Austin. This is how he analyzed in the early hours after that speech. Let's watch.
Even when they're elected in very partisan times, like Bill Clinton, for example, they use these addresses to try to win some people over, to win over a few people in the other party, and to win over a few viewers, because that's the only way you get legislation passed. That's the only way you keep the government open when you're so closely divided. But that doesn't seem to be in Donald Trump's way of thinking about politics, which is what made this sound more like a campaign speech than a governing speech.
I return to this chamber tonight to report that America's momentum is back, our spirit is back, our pride is back.
It's very hard to form a narrative about people going on a journey to a promised land when you're not really about a promised land, but instead responding to a series of grievances. When he says a golden age of America, his golden age sounds like it's removing things that different groups are angry about for one reason or another. So that's not a play. That's not a story. That's a set of a list of grievances.
And Paul, let me also just tell you what the president said to Democrats in the chamber. Quote, "There's nothing I can do to make Democrats smile, stand and applaud. They won't join us in celebrating so many wins for our country." But of course, Democrats have a very different perspective. They do not agree with this president's policy positions, be that from the removal of undocumented immigrants from the United States, be that the foreign aid freeze, the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Change Agreement, the World Health Organization, which Trump again last night referred to as a corrupt organization. He also withdrew the United States from the Human Rights Council. And then, of course, railed against diversity, equity and inclusion, a charge that has also been leveled against South Africa, as you well know, in terms of its hosting and presidency of the G20 this year.
Yeah, absolutely. From a global perspective, I mean, Trump's affinity for imposing tariffs is creating uncertainty in global trade relations, despite the negative market reactions in the USA this week with the retaliatory tariffs imposed by other nations that are set to go into effect on the 2nd of April. What more do we know about this?
Yeah, it's one of those topics, right, that has the globe watching and sitting on the edge of their seats wherever they may be, because when he talks about these reciprocal tariffs, he's essentially saying the United States is evaluating bilateral trade relationships with all countries, and if they see that there are tariffs imposed by those countries on the United States for certain goods, they are then going to now impose reciprocal tariffs on that. As you well know, 24 hours ago, 25% U.S. tariffs were imposed on Mexico and Canada. Canada, of course, has already responded with retaliatory tariffs. We are now seeing news that just emerged the last hour, Paul, that Trump is giving a 1-month exemption to auto manufacturers in the United States in terms of the imposition of those tariffs. So they've now received a waiver for another month, but this just leads to greater uncertainty in terms of economists like certainty when they make decisions. Investors like a certain degree of certainty, and all this is creating is uncertainty. You saw a very strong response from the outgoing Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and you've also seen the sort of posture from blocs like the European Union saying that if Trump imposes tariffs, they will reciprocate. This is how Jeremy Suri of the University of Texas Austin also weighed in on the question of tariffs. Let's watch.
He doubled down on the tariffs, which is going to make it harder for him down the line to either reverse himself or to claim he didn't really support tariffs. I mean, he can't blame someone else for that. It was interesting. He said, we can blame Marco Rubio if some things don't work out in the Middle East. He actually said that in the speech. He's taken personal ownership over the tariff issue. And if that produces rising costs, a trade war, supply chain problems, and perhaps a recession, as many Republican economists, as the Wall Street Journal thinks will happen, I don't know how he walks his way out of that black eye.
And in Paul, on tariffs, the president also said, quote, "It's a beautiful word. If you don't make your products in America, you will pay a tariff." He also said that America had been ripped off for decades by every country on earth, and that tariffs are about protecting the soul of our country. Of course, a reference there to the United States. So very much all in on the tariffs. The question is he going to own it if things don't pan out quite as he might be expecting?
Yeah, and absolutely. We've seen some reactions there that countries are now retaliating. Now, Sherwin, as you mentioned in your piece, Panama, Greenland, Gaza and Ukraine also featuring in his comments on foreign relations. Do we expect some movement on the Ukraine issue in particular, given the testy relationship we witnessed between President Zelensky and Trump late last week?
Well, there's certainly been a reaction from Zelensky after that Friday meeting. He, of course, traveled to the United Kingdom soon after that and has been on a tour de force, essentially, on social media, thanking the United States constantly for the humanitarian and military aid they've given to Ukraine since the invasion by the Russian Federation over 3 years ago. So there seems to be a thawing in the relationship, given the posture. As you well know, subsequent to that meeting, the United States has curtailed all military aid to Ukraine, and we understand there's also limited intelligence sharing with the Ukrainian army, which of course is still in a war against the Russian Federation and the Russian military. But we do certainly get a sense that from those remarks by the president in the chamber last night, that he received this letter from Zelensky and was very happy with it, essentially, saying that it was a thawing of the relationship, and he was appreciative of the sentiment expressed in it by Zelensky. So, Zelensky has also indicated that he still wants to move ahead with that rare earth minerals deal that has now been in limbo since that tense meeting in the Oval Office, almost a week ago now. But yeah, indications are here that there is a thawing. The United States, though, has been on the record that they want Zelensky to go. The question is, how do they move forward here? Do they sign that deal? And does military aid to Ukraine resume? That will be indicative of where we go from here, I think.
Yeah, interesting times, interesting developments as we continue to monitor all of this. Wrapping up that conversation, thank you very much, U.S. Correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease.